started, it started when I realized that I loved opera more than I was allowed or permitted to love it, and I needed to find a way to justify and find a context for my inordinate, excessive love for this art form. I had perhaps in mind a gentleman named Wayne Martin, whom I had read about long ago, who was known as Judy Garland's #1 fan, and whose home was a sort of museum of Judy Garland artifacts. And when I discovered the existence of this Wayne Martin, not an opera queen, a Judy Garland queen, I thought, well, I would never want to be that person. Though coincidentally and malheureusement, his name was Wayne. As I wrote my book, it was clear to me that I did not want to strike a tone of false historical authority. I did not want to pontificate as an expert on the history of opera. I wanted to render my desires and impressions transitory, fugitive, uncertain, delicate, to let them hover rather than to land. I was influenced, of course, by my great predecessors in the art of the aphorism and the drifting essay, Roland Barthes, Michel Leiris, Susan Sontag, Walter Benjamin. The Queen's Throat is the original title, and in the United States, within a gay subculture of perhaps 40 years ago, the term opera queen meant a gay man who had an inordinate love for opera and an extraordinary command of the minutiae of opera lore. It was a somewhat derogatory term. It cast lightly aspersions on this excessive connoisseurship. So the title, The Queen's Throat, the original title, referred to the throat of the fan, inevitably a silent throat, to the throat of the diva, who was the queen, and to perhaps to suggest that the throat is a site of danger and risk, a throat, the queen's throat that may lose its power to sing, as Maria Callas did, and a sexually charged zone as well. The Mystery of Desire, in the subtitle, Opera, Homosexuality, and the Mystery of Desire. We don't know the origin of our loves. We don't know why we love opera, dance, sports. We don't know why we love men or women or dogs or cats or horses. We endure our loves and we perhaps embroider them, but we don't understand where they come from, and we love the enigma of our desires. I understood that I could not master the entire subject of opera and homosexuality. It was too vast, it covered too many centuries. But I could choose a few concrete locations: the record player, Maria Callas, voice manuals teaching how to sing, the strange marriage of words and music. I could land on each of these islands and cover them thoroughly, and then float away. I think that the reality of my opera-going life has been that I only can go to the opera a few times a year. I've never had the budget, the time, or the geographical proximity to be going as frequently as a music critic could go, or perhaps somebody who lived in Berlin or Paris or New York in the 1960s and could go every night. So for me, opera has been an experience of vicariousness via records, but the great thing about opera in the 20th and now 21st centuries is that it is portable. It doesn't just exist in live performance. And we can take it into our bodies. Even, I think, when there was, at the time of writing my book in 1993, there were these things we called Walkmen. That was the beginning of a moment where you could go out on the street and carry with you an operatic soundtrack. Maybe the most radical point of my book, or the point that I believe in the most, is that opera does not exist out there in the opera house as a genre owned by its makers, either the composers, librettists, or singers, or conductors. but that opera is owned by the listener who appropriates and takes within his or her body the sounds. And that opera is therefore a radically free, unstable, and stealable art form. That you can literally voler, you can be a theft, pilfer, and you can take this cultural treasure into your body and do with it exactly what you want. Who is today the opera queen? Perhaps, like I would like to say, maybe this is a fanciful, perhaps very French answer in the spirit of Deleuze and Guattari and others. Perhaps the identity of the opera queen no longer resides in a single body, but is splintered and fragmented across culture at large, and that we each possess a tiny fragment or gleam of the opera queen, that we've been given opera queendom as a kind of scattered bequest. Honestly, I never thought that it would not be pleasant for the opera queens to read my book. If some of them found it unpleasant, I'm very sorry. But I felt that perhaps this was a population, the population of the opera queens, that had never been given their dignity, never been seen as auditors or receptors of the sublime. So I meant to do my tribe justice. And I meant as well to suggest that anyone who loves an art form too much is perhaps taking a staircase toward the sublime or the ineffable. And such passengers or voyagers were to be celebrated. The love of opera among a certain subculture of gay men came to its full efflorescence at the time before and around Stonewall, 1969, when a gay community coalesced and a gay identity coalesced. And at that moment where there was in a way, a public proliferation of ways of being gay, sadomasochism, bodybuilding, opera love, these passionate ways of being publicly gay, and that when AIDS arrived in the late 70s, early 80s, it nipped in the bud or foreclosed, tragically, possibilities of gay flowering. And so that when I wrote the book, I was aware that so many of the men who were opera queens were dying, and they gave me their records. I was the custodian, survivor of a tribe. I also, when I wrote the book, didn't know whether I had AIDS, honestly. That was at a time when one didn't get tested. And so that there's a sense that as I wrote the book, I wrote it under the pressure of possible death. We're always writing under the pressure of possible death. The main themes of opera are love and death, and it seemed therefore poetically just that I bring these themes together. The world of opera has changed a lot since my book was published. There are now opera singers and opera directors who are openly gay, so the closet isn't such a defining term. There are operas being written that have gay subject matters. There are productions of older operas in the repertoire, Don Giovanni, Don Carlo. Which I don't think there's been a gay Don Giovanni, but I think somebody should do it soon. Leporello and Don Giovanni. Yeah. Let's work on that. But I think that there is no longer a sense that the unconventional desires need to be masked in the opera house. A major sub-theme of The Queen's Throat, or Anatomie de la folle lyrique, is the possible shame and humiliation that comes, first of all, to the singer who fails. The singer, like Maria Callas, who loses her voice, has a breakdown. Vocal crisis is a major, dangerous subtext of Anatomie de la folle lyrique. In the book Humiliation, written more than almost 20 years later, I focus exclusively on these moments of public exposure and humiliation. And in humiliation, I speak specifically about the dangers for performing musicians of losing it on stage. For me, it's always the primal terror has been the thought of what is it like for a singer to step on stage and be doing this thing that few people on earth can do, to reach that high note. How do the singers overcome that terror? And how do we, as listeners, what can we learn by vicariously identifying with the personal risk involved? I know when I go to the opera, my hands are sweaty because I'm nervous. I have stage fright for the singers, particularly within an aria. I'm terrified when the major aria begins in Faust. Faust gets, and when the orchestra gets quiet, or Pourquoi me réveiller in Werther, and it's Alfredo Kraus, and he's 58, and he's at the Met, and he's singing, and what if he doesn't make it to that note? I would like to secretly argue for an opera culture. I would like to proselytize for an opera culture that was less punitive about good and bad performances. I feel that the best readers of my book and the most passionate adherents of it were fellow poets, essayists, lovers of art and beauty who wanted to find literary celebrations of how detailed our loves could be. I was happy to have my gay readers, lesbian readers, my, as we say in the United States, queer readers. But I feel in some way that the book's ideal readers were people longing to find books that did not adhere to the norms. My book was irregular. It was too poetic to be a work of history, too personal to be authoritative, too fragmented to be offering a unitary argument, impassioned, unreliable, unstable, carefully formed. If I were to write the book now, I would probably not insist so much upon gay identity. I don't know why I wouldn't insist upon it. Perhaps it's that I feel now that the most dangerous and laudable and perishable part of myself is my aesthetic sensibility. The gay part of me seems perfectly stable and that it can take care of itself. But I feel, on the other hand, that my tendencies toward the sublime are more embarrassing, more in need of detailed elaboration and archiving.